Have you ever found yourself wondering who really decides the speed limit on your street? Or why that new park is suddenly being built? Well, those aren't just random choices. They're all part of something called public policy. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on who actually makes the rules that shape our daily lives.
All right, so to really get our heads around this big idea, let's kick things off with a question you've probably asked yourself at some point.
So, who is it? The mayor? The governor? Some person in an office hundreds of miles away? Well, the thing is, these aren't just random decisions that happen out of the blue. They are the result of a very specific process, and questions just like these, they're at the very heart of public policy.
And yep, there's an official term for this stuff: public policy issues. Now, what I think is so interesting here is that phrase, discussion and debate. It really highlights that policy isn't just some rule that's handed down from on high, it's actually the result of arguments and compromises and a whole lot of back and forth over how to solve real-world problems.
Okay, so if policy is the outcome of this big game of discussion and debate, then who are the players? That brings us to our next section, what I like to call the government playbook, where we're going to meet the who behind all these decisions.
You know, the setup is actually pretty logical when you break it down. Just think of it like a grid. On one side, you've got the three branches of government. You've got the legislative, who make the laws, the executive, who carry them out, and the judicial, who interpret them. And on the other side, you have three levels: federal, state, and local.
And here it is. This is basically the playbook. Every single government body that gets involved in making policy fits somewhere on this grid. And this structure, it's not an accident. It's designed specifically to distribute power. So understanding this map is really the key to knowing who has the authority to do what.
So, now that we have our game board all laid out, let's make this a whole lot less abstract. It's time to put some real players in their positions and see what they actually do.
So, let's start populating our game board, right? We're going to look at a few key players from different spots on this grid to see what their job description really looks like.
Let's start right at the top of our grid, the federal executive branch. This is where you'll find players like the Department of State. And their job is huge. They're the ones managing our relationships with other countries, running U.S. embassies all over the world. This is public policy on a global scale.
Now, if we stay at the federal level, but just slide over one box to the legislative branch, we find the Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO. Now, they don't actually write the laws, but their role in policy is massive. They analyze the economic impact of any proposed law. You can kind of think of them as the neutral scorekeepers for Congress, telling lawmakers, hey, here's what this new policy is actually going to cost.
Okay, let's drop down to the state legislative level. Here you'll find groups like Ohio's Legislative Service Commission. These are the folks who do the supercritical, detail-oriented work of helping lawmakers actually write the text of new laws. This is where the nitty-gritty legal language gets hammered out.
Now, over in the state judicial branch, you've got the courts. And here's a key distinction. They don't make policy, but they absolutely apply it. So, for example, when a judge uses official sentencing guidelines, which are basically a rule book created by the legislature, to decide a prison term, that judge is implementing public policy.
And finally, let's bring it all the way down to our own backyard, the local level. Your county commission, for instance, might grant a tax abatement. That's a temporary tax break to a new factory. That one decision is a piece of local economic policy that directly impacts jobs and property taxes for everybody in town.
So we have all these different players on the board, right? From the local county commission all the way up to the Department of State. But here's the thing. They don't operate in their own little boxes. The really interesting part is how the game is actually played. Just think about a major issue, like building a new highway. There's no way a single government agency can handle that alone. You've got federal, state, and local players all forced to interact. And that interaction, well, it can either be teamwork or it could be a whole lot of tension.
And this slide really shows you the two sides of that coin. On the one hand, you have collaboration. That's when the federal government provides the highway funding, the state designs the project, and the local city approves the final route, all working together. But you can also have conflict. Maybe the state wants the highway to go right through a city park, but the city government fights them on it tooth and nail. That's where policy gets really interesting.
And this quote, it just sums it all up perfectly. The fact that so many different players from all over our playbook have to get involved is exactly what makes public policy so complex, so challenging, and honestly, so important. This interplay, this is where the real action happens.
Okay, we've covered the what, the who, and the how, but that leaves the most important question of all. So what? Why does understanding this whole playbook actually matter to you in your day-to-day life? Let's connect the dots.
So here is the single most important takeaway. Public policy isn't some dusty book of laws sitting on a shelf. It's a living, breathing, dynamic process. It's a constant negotiation, a push and pull, between all those players we saw, each with their own priorities and their own ideas about how to solve a problem.
And this process, it literally shapes the world right outside your front door. It determines the quality of your local parks, the safety of your roads, the funding for your schools, and maybe most importantly, understanding how this game is played is the first real step to making your own voice heard in it.
So I'll leave you with this question. Think about one issue happening in your own community right now. Now that you know the playbook, where can you spot these forces of collaboration and conflict at work? And maybe more importantly, which player on that board do you think really holds the power to get things done? Because once you start looking for it, I promise, you'll see this game being played out everywhere.